If you can find something that you can hold back forever, that's going to give fans way more of a reason to want to opt in or buy than if it's just early access for now.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast brought to you by Entrepreneur.io.
What's up, Indies? Welcome back to Creative Juice. This is episode 333. 333. We're going to be talking about music marketing today and how to promote gated content to your fans. I'm your host, Jack McCarthy. With me, as always, is Circa, and I'm super excited to get on to this topic because it's a question that we get a lot. How do I effectively promote content behind a paywall to my fans? That might be unreleased content, that might be unreleased music, it might be videos or experiences that fans can't get anywhere else, and it's behind a paywall or behind a opt-in gate. And a lot of artists wonder, how can I get this out to my fans more effectively? How can I get more people engaging with it? So that's what we're going to talk about here today, and I'm super pumped. Cirque, what's up, dude?
Not a whole lot, man. Just been in the boards, freaking it. I'm ready. You've been on vacation, so we pre-recorded a bunch of episodes, so I'm psyched to get back into the swing of things.
Me too, man. And I'm happy to be kicking off with this topic. I feel like I'm energized after a little trip, some sun and some surfing. It's good to be back, though, and I'm pumped to get into it. Like I said, as we kind of kicked off here, I think this is a question that artists have at a variety of different stages in their career. And so we can sort of break this down into two categories: artists that are getting started and trying to figure out, how do I promote different types of content to my fans, and how do I get them over the hurdle of either a paywall or an opt-in gate, and how do I do it effectively, and how do I promote the content that I'm trying to get them to interact with. And then for artists that are sort of beyond that early stage, how do I scale it, and what actually makes sense to try and scale? These are the types of questions that I get often, and I've got some stories more recently from the agency that I think will be really useful for you guys listening to keep in mind as you're working with paywalls or gated content. But maybe it's worth just jumping off here, talking about what gated content actually is and the different ways that you can put content behind a gate or a paywall.
Yeah, and also like a super cool case study involved in all this. So definitely perked all of our ears up on the team when we first heard about it.
Yeah, definitely an exciting one. I'm pumped about it. But when we talk about gated content, in case you're new to the idea, it is the concept of taking something, whether it be unreleased music, behind the scenes videos, really anything. The gross word that people don't like these days is content. It seems to be a little bit of a cuss word in creative circles, which, whatever, I'm not going to comment on that. I think that kind of discourse is a little bit silly. But when we talk about gated content, you can really think of it as anything that you might want to put beyond a paywall where someone has to pay to access it and you can't get it otherwise. Or sometimes it's behind an opt-in. This is where a lot of businesses and creatives start. It might just be an email opt-in where it's like you can get exclusive access to XYZ things, an unreleased track, a secret EP, behind the scenes making of my most recent record, whatever that content might be. It could live behind a free paywall or a free gate where all they need to give is their email or their phone number to get access to it. Those are typically the two places where gated content lives.
Yeah. There's been seasons of success as it pertains to gated content, right? There was like a period in like 2015 or 16 where like tons of music marketing chuckleheads were like talking about like gated song download, fan link. Like it was when Tone Den first came out and they had like very easy to use tools for creating like gated content, and people were actually getting opt-ins this way and it was working. And so like it was introduced in the music industry in such a way that, it kind of left a bad taste, because once those stopped being appealing, sort of around when streaming kicked off, is when it really became like, all right, you're not really giving me any value for gating a song download.
Right.
And that's really all the music industry ever knew about gated content. That's like the beginning and the end of it for them. And so it just became sort of like something that companies still offer as like a tool, even though it's like long since irrelevant. But it can mean so many more things, as we're going to find out in this example and others. So yeah, it can mean a lot more than just like, give me your email address and I'll let you download my song.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting that really was like that simple opt-in funnel of a free download or a collection of free downloads was really the genesis of free gated content. And it's interesting how long that kind of held on, surprisingly, because I remember like music marketing gurus kind of teaching that for as long as into 2018 and sometimes even 2019, when streaming had been around for a number of years at that point, when it didn't really make sense to offer that as something that fans would see as valuable. But yeah, that really was kind of one of the earlier examples that you would see in the industry, and it's kind of been laughed at since.
Yeah. Gated content can obviously be like content you only give away for an opt-in, like an email subscription. Gated content can also be content that's behind a paywall. When there's an alignment between a very real reason to keep this content gated, especially if you can drive home an intention to not ungate it, right? Like, because people will just wait. Like, they'll not pay money, they'll not sign up for your email list if they can just wait. So one particularly compelling, opt-in bribe for musicians that I've always thought is underutilized is to just sort of change the phrasing, change the messaging around the gated content. Instead of saying like you get free downloads, no one cares. Like, people already assume downloads are free. So you stating it's free isn't anything really new.
Yeah.
But if you flip that and just carve away videos or songs and vow to never release them. So you're making a public statement that like, I'm never going to put these out publicly. These are only for my true fans, right? And then you say, if you sign up for my email list, you unlock all the songs I've carved away for that purpose. That completely changes the perception of what you could otherwise describe as free downloads, right?
Yeah, it's true. It's true. That makes it way more compelling. It also makes it a way more curiosity driven.
Yeah, 100%.
We talked not too long ago on the podcast about elements of newsworthiness, right? When you're creating copy or writing ads or making offers. And when you can drive curiosity into a bribe, like you're saying, Cirque, instead of just making something free that most people are thinking would have been free anyway, if you can flip it, reframe it, and make it more curiosity driven, you tap into some of those elements of newsworthiness that we've talked about. I'll make sure we link to that copywriting episode in the show notes so that you guys can check it out if you haven't listened to it. This is actually an interesting point too, and we can talk about beyond email opt-ins or text message opt-ins, phone numbers. We can talk about the different kinds of paywalls too, because really there's two primary ones that, in my opinion, exist. Maybe three if you splinter them off. You can think about one-time offer paywalls where you're just asking someone to pay one time for a thing. You see this in all different kinds of businesses. Digital products, info products, tripwire offers where you're paying just a small fee to access the thing, or membership offers where you're getting access to content, gated content ongoing, and ongoing value is ideally being delivered. So their fans are getting something on an ongoing basis. So this might look like something like a membership site or Patreon. And then the third one, which is kind of a splinter off of the second one, could be a low cost or a free trial of a membership where in exchange for the free gated content that you're giving, they're getting signed up into a recurring subscription situation like a membership with the hopes that once they consume the gated content, they love it so much that they want to keep getting more, and then they're roped into a recurring membership.
Yeah. I don't know how much you can actually talk about sort of why gated content has sort of been on the team's mind, but it's definitely quite a result was achieved by the agency in regards to a piece of content that literally could not be put out on free distribution channels because it was profane, I believe, right?
Yeah.
So like out of a real need to not get censored by YouTube, say, they were effectively able to gate this content and have a real reason why like you're not going to see this if you don't buy it. right?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll talk a little bit about the story. We've been working with one of our clients for the last few months on a release where they were releasing content behind a paywall for a launch over the course of about 12 weeks. And each week, content has been dropping publicly around this launch. And throughout the process, fans have had the option to get early access because stuff has been dropping weekly for this artist. But around that, fans have had the option to get early access to everything that they're releasing by purchasing one time, and they get the whole collection that's being dropped ahead of time. And there was a whole release party that was part of it. So there was a big premiere night where if you signed up and you bought the $12 ticket to the premiere, you got the whole series in the launch at one time. It was a fantastic effort. This was like the idea of putting an early access offer behind a paywall. Worked really well for this client of ours. Now, what was interesting was as he continued to or started to drip out this content over time and it started to go public, we continued to use the early access angle because, like I said, the content was dropping weekly. So there was still an incentive for people to want to see the whole thing, to get everything all at once as each piece dropped weekly. So there was always that call to action of like, hey, here's the next thing in my launch series. But if you want the rest of it before anybody else, you can get access here. And we would point them to the sales page. And that continued to drive sales, which was really cool. So gated content continued to work. But what really started to turn the tide for this artist, and this is where we can talk about how you can use hooks in promoting your gated content, is we switched hooks about midway through this launch cycle from just early access or continued early access to now we have a piece of content that even though you can see it publicly tomorrow, next week, whatever it might be, whatever the cycle was, there's actually going to be some of it that we can't put out publicly. We got to censor it publicly on YouTube, for example. In this artist's case, we had to publicly censor it on YouTube because it was a little spicy. And there was some profanity, and YouTube would have given them a yellow flag on their account. So the content couldn't go public. Totally, there was a censored version. So what we said to fans was like, if you want to see the uncensored version, the only place you're ever going to be able to see it is if you go here. And we sent them to the sales page. And sales shot up to the degree of like a $30,000 day, which was really cool to see the first time that we used that angle. Then the next week we went back to early access. And then what do you know? A couple weeks later, we had another piece of content that again had to be censored. So the public would never be able to see the fully uncensored or uncut version of this content unless they went behind the paywall. So hopefully you can kind of see what I'm saying here is they had a hook to lean on because they had to keep a piece of the content or a part of the content away from the public eye just due to platform restrictions. But you could orchestrate this no matter what, really. They just had a helpful limitation to where they were releasing to their fans, where some of it had to go behind a paywall, which worked out in their favor. But changing that hook midway through and teasing fans a bit with screenshots and things like that, or little teaser videos, worked really, really well to drive enough curiosity to make fans raise their hand and be like, okay, if early access wasn't enough for me, the fact that something's going to be withheld from me, if I'm just, part of the group of fans that are kind of just waiting for the content to come out publicly, the fact that something is going to be withheld from me is enough to make me want to buy. And I don't think artists rely on that kind of messaging and that kind of angle enough when it comes to their gated content. Find something in your releases when you're gating content. Find something that will be held back. You started the conversation by talking about that, Cirque. If you can find something that you can hold back forever, that's going to give fans way more of a reason to want to opt in or buy than if it's just early access for now.
Yeah. And I think we can map even like why it's like more compelling from my example to yours, which is that like it really is the exclusivity and the scarcity. It's such a potent motivator to get people off the fence to do something.
Right.
And just the idea that like there's this thing I like I'm into it, and there's just a piece of it that I'll never get if I don't do this right now.
Yeah.
It just gets you to do it. For any of my favorite shows, if I was told there's a lost episode that never hit streaming and isn't available like online, like I'm going to do whatever it takes to see it. Even if it's like a show that isn't like my favorite show or whatever, you know?
For sure, yeah. I think the idea of the lost episode is a really good example. Unreleased songs can be a really good example. Podcasts actually do this really well, and YouTube creators do this really well, where, you know, if they have a thriving membership community, like I see this with Patreon for YouTube channels often, where they'll have the uncut version of their videos or the uncut version of their podcast interviews locked behind a paywall. And for their fans that really love what they do, that's going to be a reason for them to want to jump over that paywall or opt in the case of like a free opt in. Those are really good examples. So if you're looking for examples to study, don't look to the music industry because I think that gated content is critically misunderstood by artists and bands and music at large. Look to the creator industries, look to YouTube channels, look to podcasts, because they do it really well. And I want to talk about why a little bit. And I think that this has to do with when artists get into paywalls or gated content and what it takes to actually do that at scale. Because I have conversations with artists all the time. I think artists get into the idea of having a Patreon, many of them very early, or a membership site very early in their careers. And it can work really well. We did an episode not too long ago, probably about a year ago, on kind of building minimum viable product membership sites. And it can work really well early on in your career because people just want to support you, right? They like you, they might want to support you. And so you get a handful of fans that are just like, okay, cool. No matter what you're going to offer in your membership site, as long as you come up with a few things that are of value, those kind of early people might support it. But the question then comes later of, how do I grow that? And once you start growing a fan base, then comes the question of like, well, are you actually offering something that more than just the early supporters want or not? And I think that that's where it gets really challenging, because you're not actually going to be able to grow and scale content behind a paywall or a gate unless you actually know what those people want. Because the first cohort, they're more than likely just supporting you because they like you. But getting other people to do it, the newer fans, the ones who aren't the, you know, the OGs, the day ones, it's a little bit harder of a sell.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's why, in my view, like the comedy podcast model for Patreon has been so compelling. And it's another example of what we're talking about, which is that like when I get into a comedy podcast, they will frequently have like a $5 a month Patreon. And every week when they record an episode, they record an extra episode for Patreon.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Dumb, simple. They're not promising the world. They're just doing what they're already doing for a little bit longer and just putting it on Patreon only. So I'll get into a show that's like 300 episodes deep, and it's like, holy hell, there's a whole other set of these episodes like that I've never heard.
You mean to tell me there's 600?
Yeah. And also like that's one where it's not this big like circus of different things they're trying to fulfill. It's one thing. And that also makes me, in a weird way, less likely to cancel my subscription because I'm not constantly reminded of it. It's such a low dollar value and it's like not a big deal. That makes it more compelling to just like stay with it. And like a lot of them that I've subscribed to, I just kind of stopped listening to the Patreon episodes, and maybe one day I'll catch back up.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
It's another thing for you to binge watch or binge listen to.
Yeah.
Yeah, comedy podcasts are another really good example, or comedy YouTube channels are a really good example of somewhere to look for inspiration. But I think that that's kind of the challenge, is like early on, whether it be for email opt-ins, text opt-ins, or paywall gated membership content, it can be a real challenge to figure out if your fans actually like the thing that you're offering them, or if it's just early people who want to support you no matter what. And I think a lot of artists get stuck knocking on the door of their fans as they grow to sign up for a thing that they really don't want. And so you have to spend time figuring out what it is your fans actually want that's gated, or that you can gate, or that you can splinter off and then gate, and then you can grow it.
Yeah.
But a lot of times it involves a shift in what you were doing in your early days. And I think that that's really, really challenging and difficult for a lot of artists to accept. I've seen that time and time again when it comes to artists that are trying to get a foothold and get established. And it comes to the, cohort of fans that they've got early days in a membership site.
Yeah.
So I think that's where a lot of artists go wrong, is not really knowing what it is their fans want, trying to gate things that they don't really want or care about. And then the second kind of critical misstep here is when you do have an idea of what your fans want and you decide to put it behind a gate of some kind, paid or free, doesn't matter, is you then let up and you let everybody have everything forever, no matter where they're looking. And it kind of takes away a reason for people to sign up or opt in and get the thing behind the gate, because they could just, like you said, wait and get it for free later and not take their time or open their wallet. And that's kind of like mistake number 2. And the mistake number 3 is like not teasing the thing that's behind the paywall. And I think that that can be a really big opportunity. And this was something that we learned from this use case with our client recently, was not only were they willing to tease content, they were actively dropping the content that was behind the paywall over time, which was kind of part of the whole release strategy for them anyway. So that was fine. That wasn't a misstep. That was intentional. But when it came to the content that was going to be behind the paywall forever, they still teased it. It was still going out there publicly. It was censored. Fans were made aware of the fact that it was going to be censored. We dripped out, short snippets of uncensored versions on socials, in email, screenshots, all of that kind of stuff was out there. So that was a teaser of what could be gleaned on the other side of the paywall. And I think if you're having a hard time convincing your fans to sign up for something that you've got behind a gate, think about different ways that you can tease what's actually on the other side to them in a way that would drive curiosity. If you can do that, don't just say it, show it.
100%. I hope that this episode emphasizes for you guys how important, not so much like the thing that you're offering, but the way it is packaged and presented matters. Or how important it is. Like, it can literally take something that nobody will ever sign up for or buy and turn it into something that like people cannot wait to buy.
Yeah.
So this is really a sort of a lesson in packaging and how you explain things. And just like Jack said, it's in how you present it. You have to tell them why it's compelling, and it should be a good reason.
Yeah, for sure. It is a little bit of an oxymoron, isn't it? Where we're talking about how, it really matters that you put something behind a paywall that people actually want, but the packaging matters more than that,
Yeah, 100%.
It's got to be something that they want, especially once you're past the early days of growing a fan base. But even if it is something that you want, if you don't get the bow tie right and the wrapping paper right, they're probably not going to want it that much, or fewer of them are going to realize that they want it. Marketing gated content is really more about the processes of making fans realize that they want something rather than coming up with the perfect thing.
Yeah.
And we've even experimented with this with Indepreneur. We were just talking the other day amongst the team about different ways to build sales pages. And we were actually talking about splintering off some of the content that we were going to be selling as the video sales letter itself, and putting that on the sales page rather than a traditional talking head VSL.
It's possible that like previews of gated content are helpful in that regard.
Right, exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Think about ways that you can preview the content that you're trying to get your fans to sign up for. And again, this goes for free and paid. Like, we've been talking a lot about paid here because our case study from our agency client was specifically a paid example. But this goes for free stuff too. If you're just trying to get your fans to sign up for your list, don't just tell them, show them. Rather, show and tell. That's kind of like the trifecta. Have something great, put it behind a paywall or an opt-in, tell your fans about it in a way that's compelling, and then show them a little bit, tease it to them, and you're more than likely going to get more people raising their hand and signing up for it.
Yeah, 100%.
So I'd be really curious to hear from you guys, those of you that have tried membership sites, those of you that have text opt-in bribes or email opt-in bribes. What have you tried? What could you do differently based on the things that we've talked about in this episode? And what do you think you could learn from creatives outside of music? Because that's really the place to look. Let us know. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear from what you've tried, what's worked for you, and what hasn't. And I hope to see you guys grow. I hope that this is helpful. I hope the story from IndieX was useful. This is just a different way to think about promoting gated content that you probably won't hear about inside the music industry.
Let's go.
Well, hope you guys dug this. Go create some cool stuff. Promote it to your fans. We'll catch you next time on Creative Juice. Peace out.